So the other day on Twitter, someone asked me to react to a video of a very young girl. I'm talking like 6, 7, 8 years old, very young girl in a club getting a lap dance from a drag queen. And I gotta be honest, this is not an issue I've actually thought a great deal about. So the very first thing I did was I Googled. I Googled looking for information. And what struck me about that experience was that every single article that came up was pro children and drag queens. And that to me doesn't really seem realistic, if I'm honest. There are always multiple sides and multiple angles to look at from every single story. And so why is every article coming up pro children and drag queens? But I kind of looked around, and because I do want to hear the pro side of the story as much as the negative. And I came across this article on Psychology Today. Drag queen story time for children. Is listening to a drag queen read a story dangerous for a child? And I kind of skimmed this article when I first saw it and was like, ooh, this seems a little bit excessive. So it's by this guy, Joe Cart. Joe is a PhD. Let's scroll down to the bottom to see what he's a PhD in. Joe Court, is a sex and relationship therapist and co-director of Modern Sex Therapies Institute, which provides certifications, blah, blah, blah. I guess okay. So he's a PhD in something and a sex and relationship therapist. Fine. I'm not sure how that overlaps with being a child therapist because, you know, like adolescent psychology is a very, very, very different field. So I don't know exactly where the overlap is or why Joe here is qualified to speak to the development of minors. Listen, man, my PhD is in general psychology, and I'm not qualified to speak to the development of minors. I'm gonna offer that up front. That is not my area of expertise. I took like 1 or 2 classes on it, and that was it. And I don't even really remember them because I've been working with adults for the past, decade of my life. But what I want to do though is read through this story and do a little bit of a reaction video to this story because I'm gonna be honest. When I scanned it, I saw some crazy things, and I know I'm gonna have reactions to this story. Again, I have not read the thing. We're gonna discover this together. But before we get into that, I do want to just offer my general thoughts about the issue of kids and drag queens in general. First off, I have no issue with drag queens. I think drag queens are fabulous. Like, who doesn't love a good drag show? I do start to question when it comes to bringing kids into drag clubs or bringing kids into bars, especially when they're very young. I do question why that is the best activity for children to do. And hear me out. So children's brains are very malleable when they're young. I mean, they're super, super malleable. So if I were to have a kid, and again, full disclosure, I don't have a kid. I don't think I'm going to, but like if I were, here are the activities that I would want my kid to be engaging in when they are young. I want them learning languages. Number 1, I want them learning languages, as many languages as I can get, because as you get older, it gets a lot harder to learn languages. 2, I want them taking music classes. I want them learning whatever instrument they want. I don't really care what it is, but I want them taking music classes, art classes. I also want them playing with toys and doing games that are around engineering, building things, creating things. Those are the types of activities that I would want kids to engage in because that is an extraordinarily impressionable time and I want to take most advantage of it. That's not to say everything has to be educational. You can do a lot of fun things in those areas, but we have a limited number of hours in every single day. And so parents have to make decisions about where they want their kids' brain energy to focus. And so my money, I would do things like math, engineering games, things where they can build things, understand how things work, understand how things go together. Languages, learning how to play music, learning like classical music especially is very, very good for our brain. That's where I want their energy focused, on the things that I think are going to be really beneficial as they move through life. But what about drag queen story time for children? Because I mean, it's a story hour. Is it really going to hurt anyone? I don't necessarily think so, but I think that, so going to a story hour read by a drag queen, as long as they're dressed appropriately, and I have seen some drag queen story hours where they are not dressed appropriately because these are kids, but as long as they're dressed appropriately, they've got their things covered, they keep their legs closed. And again, I only say that because I've literally seen photos of drag queen story hours with the legs spread wide apart. You can see right up the dress. That is not appropriate. I am not in favor of that because I don't think that's something that's going to benefit the kids at all, and I don't even think it serves the purpose of the damn story time. But insofar as like a group of kids getting together in a library to go see a drag queen and hear a story, I generally think I'm probably okay with that. But I think that my reasoning for that might be a lot different than Joe's here. So I'm going to read this article and I'm going to give a little reaction to it. But before we do that, listen, I'm going to shamelessly pimp my channel. I'm trying to grow the channel, guys. If you like the content I'm producing, please subscribe. If you think you're subscribed, please just double check it for me because sometimes YouTube likes to make that decision for you. Give this a thumbs up, turn on notifications, all that stuff. You guys know the drill. All right, let's read this article. Over the last few years, in cities ranging from Lafayette, Louisiana to Taunton, England, libraries have hosted men dressed in outrageous women's clothing, glitter, feather boas, and colorful dresses who read stories to children, most of whom are primary schoolers. Despite librarians nearly universally attesting to how popular drag queen storytime has become, parents and others in the community, they report long waiting lists for the event. As news begins to hit the internet and other media, a vocal minority has expressed outrage. So first thing I want to say is that just because something is popular doesn't actually mean it's a good idea. Like, this is the old adage of, like, you know, if your friends jumped off a cliff, would you follow along with them? So I mean, that's not to say it's bad. I don't know where I'm standing in relation to his argument yet. But just because something is popular doesn't mean it's good, and it doesn't mean it's something that should continue. We should always be questioning these things. This is not suitable for young children, especially when they are reading them stories which tell them they may have been born in the wrong body, an impossibility. Okay, I actually kind of agree with this. I do agree with that critique. Now, if they were reading just like average children's stories, like fine, like whatever. But if they're reading stories that are, I mean, I hate to use this word, but like grooming children to believe that they're trans when they may not be. Because again, kids are very, 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 very impressionable. And yes, I absolutely believe that I mean, trans people, the ones that I know anyway, they had their brain developed differently in the womb, and that's why they're trans. They have body dysmorphia, and that's what they are doing to make themselves feel more comfortable. There's absolutely legitimacy to that. That happens in the womb. They tend to know very early on in life that this is an issue for them. They may not be able to put their finger on it, but they know something is an issue, and then usually they end up rectifying it later in life, I hope, because, you know, I want all my trans friends to have happy lives and to feel satisfied with how they're presenting and who they are. And I know people with trans kids as well, and I wish the same thing for them. But I think that there's a difference, and this is something that I am actually like very concerned about when it comes to kind of seeding these ideas with kids. And especially the thing that probably concerns me the most is when it comes to like rapid onset gender dysphoria, when they're teenagers and all of their friends are trans and so they want to be trans. It's like the cool thing to do. That to me is terrifying. Terrifying. Again, I totally get that when kids have been exhibiting these tendencies from a very, very young age. I look at someone like Jazz Jennings, totally get that. I totally get that. I absolutely believe that transitioning was the very best thing for Jazz Jennings because she was exhibiting that from a very, very, very early age, and it doesn't seem like the parents did anything to kind of plant those tendencies. But I think an awful lot of these like woke parents are planting these ideas when their kids are impressionable, and it makes it really hard to know what's real and what they're doing because they think that mom and dad want them to do it. So that if those are the types of stories they're reading, I absolutely do have issues with that. Just read general stories, man. There are so many stories out there that you can read kids. They rant that public libraries want to brainwash preschoolers, one assumes, into becoming gay. Gay and trans aren't the same thing. And frankly, drag queens are not necessarily trans either. Come on. Conservative groups such as Family Policy Alliance have organized automated protest letters against the events, and some groups have filed lawsuits, though so far they have been unsuccessful. I think the lawsuits are taking it a bit too far, if I'm honest. Just like be adults, be human beings, go have a conversation, work out a disagreement, for Christ's sake. And also, like, you don't have to send your kids. Like, you know, for parents filing lawsuits, just don't send your kids, man. Like, you don't need to be the fucking Karens and telling everyone else what they can and can't do. Yes, I have problems with parents who are planting these ideas in their heads, the impressionable young kids that maybe planting ideas that they're born in the wrong body when they're not. But, you know, you worry about your own stuff. Let them take care of theirs. I think the thing that I'm probably least a fan of is when people are poking their damn nose into someone else's business. One of the popular reads is A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo by Jill Twiss, a comedy writer for Last Week with John Oliver, which is a parody of a children's book about a rabbit written by Mike Pence's daughter. In the Twiss version, two male bunnies get married, and Vice President Mike Pence is the villain, a stink bug who tries to stop them. Like, this is my problem with this. So, like, why does this have to be the story? This is like a very adult story. Why? I understand adults wanting to make fun of this, and fine, go to it, man. You're adults, but like, there are so many great children's books out there that teach life lessons that aren't mocking someone else. Is the lesson that you want your children to learn that you should mock people that they disagree with? Listen, I am no fan of Mike Pence by a stretch, man. I'm really not. I have made very different life choices than Mike Pence has, and I am perfectly happy with my decisions, but that doesn't mean if I had a kid that I would, you know, mock him with the kid, which is going to create much more of an impression on the kid's brains than it is on the adult brains. The outrage and fear those opposers demonstrate is unfounded and based largely on hatred of nonconformity. Yeah, my concerns are definitely an issue of hating nonconformists, because don't I look like I have been a conformist all my life with my shaved head? Well, not shaved anymore because coronavirus, like, no haircuts allowed. But, like, do I look like I've been a conformist my entire life? No. That's projection. That's projection. Hatred of nonconformity and perhaps unacknowledged fears about their own sexuality. Please, I have no unacknowledged fears about my own sexuality. You fucking, like, and this is why I hate articles like this, because this dude who's a sex therapist is infusing his own perspective into this article when he's essentially like making shit up when it doesn't exist, because that is his perspective. They are concerned that such events will confuse the children and even cause them to worry they are the wrong gender. Well, if you're reading them stories that are planting the idea that they might be born in the wrong body to very impressionable young minds, yes, I absolutely believe that could be a concern. Listen, if I had a kid, I would have absolutely no problem if they were trans. No problem. Like, whatever. I would want them to be happy above all else, and you better believe I would fight as hard as I could to make sure they had a happy, healthy experience where their school treated them well. Anything that I had influence, like played it on the sports teams they want, yeah, I would probably fight that battle. Because that's my kid. I want them to be happy, right? But I would be, if I had taken them to a thing like this, where they had read them stories about being born in the wrong body and trying to introduce these ideas when they were young, I would frankly be terrified of them medically transitioning. I really would be, because we know, what is it? I heard the desistance rate for people when they transition as teenagers is like 60% or something. I don't know if that's right. Like, someone correct me in the comments, but I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere, that it was like 60% when they transition as teenagers. It's much, much lower when transition happens as adults. But when they transition as teenagers, very, very high desistance rate. And then when we're talking about transitioning people medically, that terrifies me. Absolutely, because we're talking about changes that could be permanent to the body at that point, and possible sterility and things like that. And again, I'm not opposed to medical transitioning when there is gender dysmorphia and things like that. I think it's a perfectly appropriate thing to do. But I think if I was a parent of a kid, there would constantly be that question, like, until they grew into adulthood and I knew their brain was more fully developed, constantly be this question of like, did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing? Did they do the right thing? Are they going to regret this? I don't know. We live in a society that only recognizes that children are cisgender, the belief that your gender identity must match with the gender you were assigned at birth. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. As a longtime sex and gender therapist, I know that there is no substance to the argument that exposing anyone, including children, to the reality of people with different sexual orientation or gender identity influences the children's innate sexual orientation or gender identity. Well, okay. I think what he's saying is true in that I believe that we are born with the sexual orientation that we have, although I tend to believe that sexuality is fluid more than anything. I don't believe it's like a finite thing. I think it's fluid around through the course of your natural life. I also believe that we're born with the gender identity, and that's not to be confused with like what's between your legs. I do believe that we are born with that. However, can people be influenced to believe things that are not true? Yes. Yes. And it is very easy to influence children, especially like up until the time they're like 8, 9 years old. Man, those kids are like a sponge. They are an absolute sponge. You know, we actually have these neurons in our head called mirror neurons. They're called mirror neurons. We mirror things. We mirror what we see. That's part of the function of the brain. It's part of how the brain develops, right? And so if these kids are seeing this, the mirror neurons are going to pick up on that, and it is absolutely going to make an impression, and that impression might lead to them believing something that is different than what they were born as. So it's not quite as simple as he's making it out to be. Nonetheless, there is much fear about a gay parent impacting their offspring or how the behavior of LGBTQ adults will influence them. I am not at all worried about, generally speaking, the behavior of LGBTQ adults influencing kids, and I'm not worried about kids, you know, believing, because again, I think sexuality is fluid, so conceivably, you know, that will change over the course of their lives. Anywhere could change over the course of their lives, where sometimes they want one thing and sometimes they want another thing. I think that's a perfectly natural thing, so I don't actually have, that is not my concern with this. Ironically, when people think about children, rarely is their focus on how homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia can hurt them, and yet exposed to the institutional harms are far worse than anything a child might be exposed to in an LGBT pride parade, observing gay and lesbian relationships, or having a story read by a drag queen. And again, I'm going to emphasize, I'm not afraid of any of these things. I think these things are fun. The real problem, as I see it, lies not in exposing children to the reality of diverse sexualities and gender identities, those who do not fit the typical definitions of masculine and femininity, but rather by providing gender non-conforming kids with other templates as they begin to sort out their feelings about who they authentically are. I don't think there's anything wrong with kids not conforming to like a gender stereotype. I mean, I was a tomboy growing up, and I'll tell you what, man, when I was a kid, probably, oh gosh, I'm actually going to say all the way up through high school and maybe even college, like I would have done anything to be born a boy at that time. I really would have. I would have done anything to be born a boy. I remember when I was a kid, like all I wanted to do was play baseball. I hated softball. I hated it. I hated that I thought it was slower. I didn't like the ball was bigger. I didn't like the pitching. I didn't like any of that stuff. I wanted to play baseball, and my father wouldn't let me. And even though the baseball team in my high school would have let me join it if I had wanted to, but my father wouldn't let me. And I wanted to be born a boy. I wanted to do things with the boys. Does that mean that I'm a trans man? No, I'm not. I'm a woman. It is what it is. Now, is that necessarily is my experience true of everyone? Absolutely not. But I'm saying this because I have absolutely no issue with kids experimenting with how they're presenting themselves, how they're interacting with the world. And kids are going to go through phases of discovery where they are going to try to sort these things out. And frankly, I honestly, like if I was born to a woke set of parents today, oh man, you better believe they would have said I was trans. And would I have bought into it? I don't know. I think maybe I would have. I wanted to be a boy so badly when I was a kid. Oh my god, I actually bet I would have, like, if I, like, cause I'm pretty strong-willed too. I'm strong-headed. When I want something, I want it. And when I was a kid, it wasn't an option to go on T, right? But would I have done it today, especially if I had been born to woke parents who had, you know, done this stuff with me? Oh, you better believe I'm pretty sure I would have. And who knows what would have happened then? Oh my gosh, that would have been sad. And again, I'm not insinuating that's what it's like for every kid that's trans. I absolutely know people who have trans kids, and I absolutely believe that socially transitioning those kids is the right thing to do. I don't believe really, in most cases, I don't believe in medical transition until you're more like older than 18, because it just has to do with brain development. I want people to be really, really sure. But I can absolutely understand there are exceptions to that rule as well. Again, I think like someone like Jazz Jennings, totally get that. Totally. I have no issue with what they did there. Data shows a far higher suicide rate, 41%, for transgender children than others. When they are made to feel like outsiders, bullied in school, and rejected by society in which they live, they move into crisis. And this is something I do worry about too, is the suicide rate for these kids, and that's incredibly sad. But I also think there are other things that parents can do to make sure those kids feel loved and accepted and all of those things. And it doesn't, like, transition is not necessarily one of those things that's required. And furthermore, listen, like, I feel like the whole topic of this article has gotten completely off base of drag queen story hour for kids, because drag queens are not necessarily like trans. Like, it's not the same thing. Why are they conflating the two issues? If you don't want your kids to go to drag queen story hour, you're transphobic. Like, the drag queen that's reading them the story probably isn't trans, is my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. But maybe we'll get back into it. The worst outcome of watching a drag queen tell a story is not influencing a child to worry and wonder if they are in the wrong gender, as many want us to believe. Okay? Again, that's not my argument. The outcome that can occur watching a drag queen telling a story is that it can save the lives of those children who are struggling with gender nonconformity and free them to explore and express themselves in ways they were meant to be and not supposed to be. And listen, man, children are going to explore and express themselves, and it might have nothing to do with them being trans, and it might have nothing to do with them being gender nonconforming. It has to do with the fact that they're kids. They're kids. That's what they do. That's what they should be doing. I feel like this author has conflated so many issues into this one article. Like, why? Why can't you just stick to the topic, man? Outrage over the drag queen storytime sessions reveals other dark underbellies of our society: misogyny and homophobia. Think about it. If women dressed as men were reading stories, there might be no problem. But men dressed as women, such as an assault on a nation's ideal of masculinity, is intolerable to many. Whatever. That's not hitting home with me at all. As a woman, that's not hitting home with me. Misogynistic conditioning comprises people's integrity by pressuring them to treat others badly, actions contrary to their basic humanity. Misogyny and homophobia, combined with fear and revulsion of sex, eliminates discussions about the lives and sexuality of LGBT people as part of the school-based education, keeping vital information from all students. Listen, man, they just conflated like 19 different issues into one paragraph. I can't even begin to break that down, because that is a whole bunch of issues. As studies confirm, it can be deadly. It inhibits their ability to form close, intimate relationships with members of their own sex, generally restricts communication with a significant portion of the population, and more specifically, limits family relationships. All right. Drag Queen Story Hour is not going to solve those problems. If the parents aren't doing the things that parents should do, taking them to one Drag Queen Story Hour is not going to solve the problems. Taking them to 2 Drag Queen Story Hours is not going to solve the problem. Taking them to Drag Queen Story Hour every goddamn day is not going to solve their problems. He's trying to put a solution for something that doesn't have as much relevance to what actually forms a child as their relationship with their parents does. Now, I have a tremendous issue with shitty parents. I could go on for days about my issues with shitty parents, but this is not the same goddamn thing. Like, the issues are being conflated. Costumes are playthings, flights of imagination that allow us to step out of the modernity of our daily lives and into fantasy. Yes, agreed. They don't entice us to become the characters in the costume. Disagree. Every day, thousands of children are delighted to visit Disneyland and meet characters dressed up as animals, Mickey or Goofy or Donald Duck. Do they leave us wanting to become animals? Are they confused or just delighted at the unusual display? Here's why I disagree with that. I have, so my cousin, who, my cousin has 2 small kids, right? And sometimes I go out and I visit my cousin, and I spend time with the kids, and I love them. They're good kids. But if I gave them some Paw Patrol stuff, they think they dress up as freaking dogs all the time. Yes, they act like dogs. Yes, they want to be dogs. They're freaking kids, man. Like, that's what kids do. You give them something or a cartoon that they like or something they like, they want to be that thing. They play pretend. They play make-believe. Again, nothing wrong with that, and I don't even think there's anything wrong with kids dressing up in drag as long as they aren't doing it in bars to entertain adults. When kids are dressing up in drag to entertain adults, I have a very distinct problem with that. But that's not what we're talking about here with Drag Queen Story Hour. It's not the same damn thing. But to say that kids, children who live in this land of make-believe aren't doing that, like, to them it is real. That's part of the beauty of being a kid, is they are so much more creative than we are as adults, and that's a beautiful thing. I'm not saying that in any sort of negative way. It is a beautiful thing. In many cases, the stories being read introduce kids to the idea that all others, despite appearance or sexual orientation, are worthy of respect, and to a world that is not divided into us versus them. This, I'm on board with. 100%. Good, lofty goal. I agree with it. Drag Queen Storytime provides an opportunity for... Well, although, hang on. It doesn't divide us into a world of us versus them. When the story being read at Drag Queen Story Hour is literally mocking the Vice President of the United States, that is absolutely a divisive story. That is the whole goal of that story, is to be divisive, not for the benefit of children, but to entertain the adults that brought them there. So yeah, I mean, if you pick out any normal, happy, fun, educational story, I'm totally cool with it, man. But the stories that they're reading based on this article are more divisive than that. Drag Queen Storytime provides an opportunity for parents to begin to have conversations with their kids about respecting other types of people and reassuring them that they will love their child however he or she chooses to express themselves. I'm on board with, parents providing unconditional love to their children, the children making sure they know that. I'm on board with children being exposed to different types of couples and just like an everyday environment, and he's married to a woman and he's married to a dude and all this stuff, and just like it's no big deal, because it is no big deal. It's just his life, man. So I'm cool with that. I think when it crosses the line for me is when parents start grooming their kids to think that this is the ideal. And, not that there's anything wrong with it. That came out really inappropriately. So I'm going to correct that. I'm not even going to edit that out. I'm actually going to correct that because that was not my intent. I don't think there is any ideal, orientation or gender identity. I think everything is fine. Everything is equal. I take a very non-judgmental attitude to everything in life. And so this is just different. But I do think that when parents, I think parents can plant the idea that this is what they want their kids to be inadvertently. And that is especially true with the woke crowd, to be honest, who like to plant the idea that men are toxic, masculinity is toxic, white men especially are toxic, cis white men are toxic. I mean, all these things, I think when that's the combination of factors that are coming together, where as if you have a little boy, and if I were going to have a kid, man, I would totally want it to be a boy. I really would. But if you're going to have a little boy and you're going to teach that boy that masculinity is toxic on one hand, and that Drag Queen Story Hour is awesome on the other hand, and that, that trans women are amazing and stunning and brave, but men, like cis white men, are toxic, that kid's going to have certain ideas. And again, if that kid is legitimately trans and is born that way and decides to transition and lives a wonderful, happy life as a woman, nothing would make me happier. But when they start going through this because they think it's what mom and dad want and they want to make mom and dad love them, that's when I really question it. And I think that it is very dangerous for the kid, because you're setting themselves up to you're setting themselves up to have a lot of problems in life if that's the case. So it is a very fine line to walk, and I'm not jealous of any parent who's trying to walk this fine line and making sure they're exposing their kids to things that are healthy and different types of relationship and different types of love and different types of way to live life. Again, I approach life in general with a very non-judgmental attitude. Just because I didn't make a choice to do something or I don't think it's best for me doesn't mean I have any problem with you or anyone else doing it. Go to town. But, it is a very fine line to walk. Let's finish up. As one library patron in Lafayette said, we need to learn how to recognize each other, how to see each other's gifts and talents and flaws, and how to meet each other. I agree with that. This story time that's caused so much controversy is just an opportunity for kids, older kids, younger kids, almost babies, to see each other, to experience something they've never seen before, and to learn how to relate to it. There are a lot of ways to do that, by the way, and I do agree that, like, Drag Queen Story Hour, and again, given as long as it's not being a divisive story for the entertainment of adults, I agree that it could be a good thing. I also think there are lots of other things that kids should be exposed to, and there are lots of opportunities to do that are not just Drag Queen Story Hour, and we should be exposing kids to a wide variety of experiences. Again, like I said at the top, if I had a kid this age, they're learning languages, they're playing math games, they're playing science games, they're learning engineering, and they're learning music. That's it. Probably some other stuff too. That's probably not all it, but you know what I mean. I applaud the librarians who, for the most part, have stuck to their guns and refused to allow the popular program to be shut down by those stuck in the past when there was only one view of what human beings are supposed to be. I mean, frankly, this guy seems to be like hyper combative. He seems to like that, and it always worries me when I hear about therapists or people practicing that they just have like this, there's a chip on their shoulder, isn't there, man? Like, therapists need to work out their own stuff, and I get that he's like a sex therapist and this is his jam. Again, I'm not sure how that overlaps with adolescent psychology, which is a completely different goddamn field, but I don't know. I'm not sure that I would be taking advice from him on how to raise your kids. Again, I think there are positives and negatives here. I think that I have no problem with drag queens in general. I have no problem with drag queen story time in general. But I do think that you should be very careful about what messages you're putting in front of your kids, because kids are sucking that information in a way that you as an adult are not. Their brains are much more malleable. And you might have the best intentions by doing it, but if you push too much and if you don't balance out the type of content and the types of ideas you're exposing them to, you might be setting your kids up to have some problems later down the road. And, again, I'm going to emphasize this. I'm going to beat this dead horse, man. I think that, some of the best parents I know, they're the ones that are guiding their kids through transitions. These are wonderful parents. They love their kids. They're trying to provide everything for their kids. I believe they're doing the right thing. So I have no problem with kids transitioning. I have no problem with people expressing whatever gender identity they want. That's cool. But when you're planting those ideas, that's where I have the problem. And it's a very fine line to walk. And I just hope that people think about this in a more nuanced way and are able to have that nuanced conversation. All right, guys, that's all I've got for this video. I will be back with another one soon. Leave a comment if you want to make any suggestions for things I should talk about. I do read the comments. I don't always respond to them, but I do read them. And I love hearing your ideas. Very valuable. And I'll be at you with another video very, very shortly.